God is able to turn a mistake into a mission. Today we'll be looking at the story of young Moses and how a mistake turned out to be a mission ground. And it's part of the series I have been doing, life lessons from young men and young women from the Bible. Welcome to this video. And so we just get started with the story of Moses. So Moses was born at a time when the children of Israel had been put into forced labor by the king of Egypt. This king who had come in had very little regard for Joseph. Either he didn't know him or he just had forgotten what Joseph had done for Egypt or something. So he put the children of Israel into forced labor, and then he said that every male child that was born was supposed to be thrown into River Nile to be killed, rather to drown and die. So he was born at such a time, and when he was born, his mom decided not to kill him. The Bible says she saw that he was I've forgotten the exact words, but she just had found some fond towards him. She liked this child. The child looked nice or something. I'm forgetting the exact words, but she liked the baby and she was like, she didn't want to kill the baby. And so that is where we find our first point, which is preservation. God preserved Moses from being killed by his mom because it was an order. Whenever a male child is born, they were to be thrown into River Nile. And by the way, I've not mentioned this. The story of young Moses when he was young is Exodus chapter 1 up to around chapter 2. So if you've not read, you can have a look at it. So God preserved Moses from being killed. And he stayed with his mom for 3 months. And when she realized she couldn't stay with him any longer, she put him in a basket, which she applied tar on it to avoid water getting inside the basket. And then she took him into River Nile. But just before we go on to the next point, preservation, God is able to preserve even you. You know, I was listening to a sermon, and what I picked from that sermon is God is able to preserve his people. And especially for us young people, you know, it's easy to feel like when people have, you know, those very inspiring stories of someone who either went into partying, was into drugs, or was into prostitution, or, you know, those extreme cases. It's easy to feel like those are the people that have a story and that God can use their lives to minister to people. But at times, God can preserve you. Now, not about death like Moses. For us believers, God might have preserved you. You grew up in a Christian family. You followed all the all the what do you call them, all the rules. You are just a good person. God is still able to use you. You might not have those extreme stories, but God is still able to use you, because sometimes God is the one who preserves. Especially if you got to know God at a young age, you have the Holy Spirit in you who directs you and tells you, don't do this, do this. You know, don't hang out with so and so. Hang out with these people. They have like-minded goals in life. So God is able to preserve you. So don't feel bad that you have you've not gotten into the extremes. And sometimes I remember there's a neighbor I was living with, and should always be like, you must have had, you know, been a rude child, or, you know, done some nasty things when you were a teenager. You must have gone to the extremes as a teenager. She just couldn't understand how someone didn't maybe take alcohol when they were in high school or something like that. and should be like, maybe you're pretending, But when I listened to this sermon, I was like, all right, there are things, yes, I've not been perfect. You've listened to some of my videos. I've been very vulnerable in some of my videos. So I've not been perfect, but I've also not gotten to those extremes where I can say I was an addict. And so this sermon, when I listened to it, that is what I picked. God is able to preserve. You don't have to, if you can avoid some of these things, it's okay to avoid them. And you might look like the holy Joe according to people's standards, but it's not being a holy Joe. God is just preserving you. All right. God is preserving you for whatever reason, for whatever purpose He has for you, for your destiny. He is preserving you. All right. So don't feel like you have to go to the extremes for God to probably then use your big testimony. But I'm not like disregarding the people who have those big testimonies. They are very inspiring, and they show that God can use anyone, even people who probably had a very difficult and challenging childhood, and they got into drugs, they got into all these things that are negative, and God is able to transform the people and use them for His glory. Yeah, so I'm just saying, on the point of preservation, God is able to preserve you. And not just that, it's good to note that there are many times that God preserves us from danger, from probably accidents on the road, sometimes from being attacked by robbers. God, you look at a road that you always use, and then someone is hit there, and God has been preserving you all that time. And even if you've gotten into an accident, God protected you. God helped you to still stay alive, right? He preserved your life even if you got into an accident, right? Yeah, so God preserves His own. Now we continue with the story where I'd left it. When Moses' mother took him to River Nile, she left Miriam, his elder sister, to check up on him, to just make sure that he would be okay, and just to see what happens. And at that time, the daughter of Pharaoh came to the river to swim, and she got to see the basket. She asked one of our girls to go check on the basket, and when she came with the basket, she found a baby. And the daughter of Pharaoh was like, oh, this looks like one of the Hebrew boys, and she had compassion on the baby. And that at that time, when she was at that point, Miriam, the sister of Moses, came to the daughter of Pharaoh and told her that it would be, if she asked her if she could go and get someone who could nurse the baby. And that is how Moses was reconnected back to his mom, because Miriam got her mom, and Pharaoh's daughter gave Moses back to his mom so that she could take care of him on her behalf. And when he was older, then he was taken to the palace. So from that, we pick one: divine intervention. God allowed that Pharaoh's daughter would go swimming at the same time that Moses had been dropped into River Nile, so that God would then connect Moses with the palace. So God intervened that Pharaoh's daughter would be at that point, and she would then have compassion on Moses, because she would have probably said, oh, this is one of the Hebrew boys. Why did someone leave them here instead of drowning them, right? So God intervened that she did not feel rejection against Moses, or she just had pity on the boy. Another thing on intervention, Miriam had to act with immediate, like God dropped the idea into this girl's mind to talk to Pharaoh's daughter. So that was still intervention, that God didn't just like the daughter of Pharaoh didn't just decide to go and take care of Moses because there's something he wanted to do, So it was all, when you look at it, God had a finger in that. God had a finger in that he allowed the moment of the daughter of Pharaoh to be there, and also Miriam to be quickened to talk to Pharaoh's daughter and ask her to talk to come and nurse the baby. And the fact that Pharaoh's daughter didn't refuse. She did not refuse. She did not say, oh no, I have a lot of maids around me, why would I have someone else come and take care of the baby, right? So God had to intervene because Moses was also still very young, and he needed to have his mother with him, because every child needs their mother. At those first few months, first years, a child needs a mother's attention. So it was God's intervention. Another thing we see is training. God allowed for the mother of Moses to take care of him. I believe she was even being paid like a nun, but God did not allow for Moses to be trained, just be trained in the palace all his life. For the young years, when he was young, his mom is the one who was training him. And the Bible says, train up a child in the way he or she should go. I'm paraphrasing. And when they grow up, they will not turn away from it. So Moses knew about God, knew where his roots, knew his people, he knew his family, he knew his siblings, he knew his parents. So God allowed for that to happen so that he could get that training, and especially to be grounded in who he was and a bit on who God is, right? And why they were in Egypt and all that was happening. Because I don't believe he would have gotten that training in the palace, especially about God, about the Hebrews and the culture of the Hebrews, right? So from the time that Moses was with his mom, we see that she took him when he was older, she took him to the palace. And that is where now he grew up and became an adult. And we see the Bible talking about Moses when he went to the Hebrews, he went to his people. He knew these were my people. So he went to check on them, and then he found a Hebrew being harassed by an Egyptian, and he killed the Egyptian. And that is where we see the first mistake of Moses, or rather the mistake he did that kind of now took him to another trajectory. So the mistake he did is killing someone. I don't think that it was in God's plan for Moses to kill someone, right? But at this point, given that we know that Moses had been trained by his mom, so he knew he was Hebrew, he knew his God. I think most likely he knew God, he knew the traditions and cultures of the Israelites, and he knew that they were not being treated well. But he was in the palace, so he was still getting also the training of Egypt, right? And I believe God allowed for him to be in the palace so that he could know the ways of the Egyptians, get to understand how they do things, for preparation, because he was to be the deliverer. And I believe at this time, even when Moses is killing the Egyptian, Moses somehow knew at the bottom of his heart, I believe, that he was raised to be a deliverer. God had put him in the palace to be a deliverer. But now the mistake he did is killing someone. And now the mistake specifically is impatience. That is what I see. Impatience. He killed someone. He knew he was to be a deliverer, but probably at this time, God hadn't talked to him specifically and told him, this is how you're going to go about it. So he took action in his own hands and acted on his own wisdom and acted out of probably anger, just looking at this person killing his own, or rather harassing his own, And out of impatience, he attacked someone and killed him. So that is the mistake he did, because as I said, I don't think Moses really, it was in God's plan for Moses to kill someone so that he could deliver. I don't think that was God's plan for and probably for Moses, and probably Moses might have felt that it was taking longer than, like what can he do? The way you see a need and you're wondering, what can I do? And he's been in this place for many years. By the time this was happening, he was now 40. So he probably would have been feeling, why am I in the palace if I can't help my people, right? And out of that impatience, then he acted. So that was the mistake that Moses did, killing an Egyptian. And when that happened, he went later, another time, he went just to visit his people, and he found two Hebrews, in a fight or something, and he tried to talk to them, and one of them was like, you know what, are you planning to kill me like you killed the Egyptian? He thought he had done it in secret, but apparently he had been seen. So that is the other thing we see. The other lesson we pick is some of the things you do in secret will come to light. Sometimes you think you're doing things that nobody will see, or probably in a place that nobody knows you, but there's probably someone who knows you, or someone who will be in your future. So you might find yourself probably in an office space, and you're probably doing things that are not right, thinking that what's the big deal, everybody is doing it. And then you find someone who is in that same place in the future, and they know you. So even if that is not really who you are, they already have a perception about you, right? So basically, try to do things, whether in secret or in public, do the right thing. Do the right thing, because even the Bible says the things that are hidden will at some point come to the light. Yeah, so that is the other thing we see. And because of this Hebrew saying that, Moses knew that his secret had been realized, and he now fled and went to the wilderness. All right, he went to the wilderness, and at that point, we see when he went to the wilderness, he found a well, and when he was seated there, he saw young ladies come, and the other shepherds, the ladies were shepherds, but the other shepherds, like chased them away, and they were kind of harassing them. But he had compassion for them, and he went and pulled I think it was the stone on top of the well, and the girls were able to water their animals. So what we see here, one, is empathy. He had empathy, one, also, of course, okay, one for these girls, but he also had empathy for his own people. He didn't he didn't enjoy seeing people being harassed, which is a very good quality for a believer. We need to have empathy. When you see someone being mistreated, either where you work or at school, if you're still in school, or in your neighborhood, it's good to have that compassion. Compassion is also what pushed Jesus to do miracles. He would just feel sorry for people and perform miracles to make their lives better. So as a believer, even as God is using you, whether in the corporate, in the marketplace, or even in ministry, you need to have that compassion for people and empathy for people, for you to be able to minister to people as according to God's will. Right? The other thing we are seeing is divine connection. The girls that Moses helped at the well were daughters of a Midian priest. And when the girls went home and told their dad, there's an Egyptian who helped us, their dad was like, why did you leave him behind? So they went and took him, and Moses got to live with this priest all the time that he was in the wilderness, until now God called him to go back to Egypt. So when I talk about divine connection, is God connected him with this priest so that he could mentor him. And why I say mentoring him, it's because although we don't hear much when he was in the wilderness at this time, later on, when Moses had taken now the children of Israel, he had rescued them, and they were now going towards the promised land. His father-in-law, because he ended up marrying one of the daughters, Zipporah. Now his father-in-law, this Midian priest, came to visit him in the wilderness when he was with the Israelites. We see when Moses, when the Midian priest came to him, his father-in-law, advising him, we see him advising him and telling him how to hand over, and Moses didn't even argue with it. He just went ahead and did what his father-in-law told him. Honestly, for someone to just, at this time, it's like we would say Moses had made it, right? He had made it. He had become that deliverer that he probably thought he would be. And then someone coming to him when he has made it and advising him, and he doesn't argue with it, he just goes ahead and does what his father-in-law tells him. It means he must have had some impact on him when he was younger, when he was living with him, right? Because even for us, someone who has had impact on you when you are young, when you are older, you won't even argue with them, right? You will listen to them and take their advice, because they've had impact on your life when you were younger. So that is where I see divine connection. God connected Moses with this priest so that he could prepare him and mentor him for what he was going to do in future. And that leads me to the next point, which is preparation, which I've just mentioned. So one thing is the Midian priest probably mentoring him and preparing him. But also the other thing we see is Moses was taking care of sheep, and taking care of the flock takes a lot of patience. And that prepared him to take care of the children of Israel. And not just that, he was doing it in the wilderness. He was taking care of this flock in the wilderness. So he got familiar. He was familiar with the wilderness. So by the time God was sending him back to take the children of Israel through the wilderness, he already knew the wilderness very well, because that is where he spent another 40 years just taking care of the sheep and the priests, Jethro, his father-in-law, the flock of Jethro. So God prepared him, that he knew the wilderness so well that when he sent him with the children of Israel through the wilderness, it was not a huge hassle for him. He was already familiar with the wilderness. So God prepared Moses in the wilderness. And there's so much more we can pick from Moses when he was young, but I hope you have picked one or two things, and especially on preparation, that God can even use, even if you have done a mistake and you're feeling like your life is not going to, like you're not going to become anything. This is an encouragement to you. Moses had become a murderer, but God still used that murderer. God used that mistake to still align him with his purpose. He still used that. Probably God would not have gone with the children of Israel through the wilderness, maybe, if Moses had not done what he did. He had not killed the Egyptian. Maybe God would not have used that, but God still aligned him. If you submit to God, no matter what you have done, no matter what you have gone through, God is still able to use you. if you submit to him, he will use you. Right? So it's an encouragement to you. And also, if you're going through preparation, we see Moses going through 40 years of being in the wilderness, so that when he was now 80, he would take the children of Israel through the wilderness. So if you're going through a season of preparation, this is also an encouragement to you. It might take time. We have seen this even in the previous stories I've talked about, like the story of Joseph. He went through a season of preparation. So preparation sometimes might be difficult. For Moses, it was in the wilderness, a place where probably there is no much water, there is no much pasture for his flock. But God used that period to prepare him for when he would come with the children of Israel through the same wilderness. So be patient and trust God. As I've said, submit to God, trust God, trust his process, trust what he's doing in your life. Even if you've gone through a mistake, God can still use that mistake to minister to other people. All right. Yeah, so I hope you've picked one or two things from this story, and I hope you will also leave a comment below on maybe what you have gotten most inspired about through the video I've just done, or some of the things you've already picked from the life of Moses that you feel could benefit us when we get to hear about them. Otherwise, thank you for watching to the end. Remember, if you have not yet subscribed, subscribe so that when I post the next story, you will be notified. Give us a thumbs up if you've also loved the story of Moses and the lessons we have picked from his life. All right, the next story will be the story of young King Saul. I hope to see you in the next video. God bless you.